October 14th, 1942, 11:30 p.m. In the jungle positions southwest of Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, mortar rounds from the Imperial Japanese Army's 2nd Division screamed through the night sky, slamming precisely into the foxholes of the U.S. Marine Corps 1st Division, 7th Regiment, 2nd Battalion. Dirt and shrapnel exploded outward, burying one American soldier alive before he could even scream. Along the front lines, the Japanese soldiers' banzai charge cries echoed endlessly, mingled with the sharp crack of Arisaka Type 38 rifles and the dull rattle of Type 96 light machine guns, a suffocating net of death closing in on the American defenses. Henry Nobel, a U.S. Navy field cook, huddled behind a hastily constructed bunker, clutching an iron bucket wrapped in 3 layers of canvas. The bucket radiated searing heat, a stark contrast to the cold sweat beating on his forehead. He was not there to fight. He was waiting for a lull in the Japanese artillery fire to deliver the hot stew inside to the soldiers on the front lines. For 3 days, this was the only hot meal the Marines had to look forward to in their jungle hell. On both sides of the position, vines and bushes shook violently under the artillery bombardment. Japanese infiltration teams used the cover of night and vegetation to repeatedly assault the weaker sections of the American lines. U.S. soldiers held their ground from rudimentary foxholes and trenches, firing M1 Garand rifles in alternating volleys, while Browning automatic rifle BAR positions spit intermittent bursts of fire to suppress the Japanese charge waves. In every pause between gunshots, the heavy gasps of exhausted soldiers, the moans of the wounded, and the hoarse commands of officers rang out clearly. "Watch the left flank! They're flanking from behind the trees!" a sergeant roared, raising his rifle and pulling the trigger. The bullet cut through the darkness and struck its target with a muffled thud. At that moment, he spotted Nobel behind the bunker, clutching the iron bucket, and his brow furrowed instantly. "Cook, what the hell are you doing here? This is the front line. You'll get yourself killed." Nobel had no time to explain. He just shook the iron bucket hard and shouted back, "It's hot! Stewed beans and bacon, plus hot coffee. Eat first, then fight." His voice was heavy with panting, sweat streaming down his face and dripping onto his cook's apron, stained with food scraps and dirt from his work in the makeshift kitchen that day. At the word hot, several soldiers firing their weapons paused momentarily, their eyes flashing with an unmistakable hunger. For the past 10 days, due to the continuous blockade of Guadalcanal's surrounding waters by the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet, U.S. supply convoys had been repeatedly sunk or repelled. The soldiers on the front lines had survived solely on sea rations, dry, hard crackers paired with oddly flavored meat cans that turned their stomachs after a few bites. Worse still, the cold food in the tropical jungle's damp environment had left many soldiers suffering from gastrointestinal illnesses, drastically reducing their combat effectiveness. Just as Nobel was about to dash out of the bunker during a lull in the shelling, a Japanese hand grenade landed smoking in the trench right in front of him. "Look out!" A soldier with quick reflexes lunged forward and kicked the grenade aside. A deafening explosion followed, sending a shower of dirt flying from the trench edge and knocking both men off their feet. Nobel clung tightly to the iron bucket, which remained scalding hot. He could feel the food inside sloshing violently, but little spilled out. Before setting off, he had secured the aluminum lunch boxes inside with cloth strips, precisely to handle such emergencies. "Are you crazy, risking your life for a lousy meal?" The soldier who had kicked the grenade clutched his scraped arm and shouted at Nobel, his tone laced with anger but also concern. Nobel struggled to his feet, brushed the dirt off his uniform and grinned, revealing a set of white teeth. "It's not a lousy meal. It's hot food that'll let you kill more Japs." He glanced toward the front lines. The Japanese charge had been temporarily suppressed, and officers were counting casualties and resupplying ammunition. "Quick, now's the chance. Everyone gets a portion. Eat fast." Nobel lifted the lid of the iron bucket, and a cloud of steam mixed with the aroma of food instantly filled the air, dispelling the stench of blood and decay in the trench. Several soldiers crowded around immediately, holding their dented steel helmets to use as bowls. Nobel carefully ladled stewed beans and bacon into each helmet with a simple wooden spoon, then poured hot coffee from a small iron kettle. A young soldier took the helmet brimming with hot food, his hands burning as he rubbed them together. Yet he couldn't resist grabbing a handful of beans and shoving them into his mouth. The scalding food burned his throat, but he wore a look of pure contentment. God almighty, it's hot. How did you pull this off, Nobel? As he served the food, Nobel replied quickly, found a hidden cave in the rear, heated it up with a captured Japanese gasoline stove, fuel siphoned from a wrecked Jeep's gas tank. His gaze swept over each soldier, and seeing them wolf down the meal, a flicker of resolve crossed his eyes. He knew that in this brutal battle, the spatula and iron bucket in his hands might be more effective at maintaining the unit's morale than any rifle. At that moment, Japanese artillery fire rained down again, this time targeting the bunker where Nobel stood with pinpoint accuracy. "Take cover!" the commander yelled, and the soldiers scrambled back into their foxholes. Nobel didn't have time to replace the bucket lid. He just hugged it tightly and huddled at the bottom of the trench. A shell exploded nearby, deafening him and filling his mouth with the taste of dirt. Instinctively, he shielded the bucket, his only thought. Don't let the hot food spill. The soldiers are counting on it. When the shelling stopped, Nobel slowly climbed out, checked the bucket, and found only a small amount of food had spilled. Most of it was still there. He breathed a sigh of relief, picked up his wooden spoon, and crawled toward the next foxhole. At that time, Guadalcanal had become the bloodiest meat grinder of the Pacific War. U.S. forces had landed on Guadalcanal on August 7, 1942, aiming to seize the airfield the Japanese were constructing and shatter their strategic advantage in the South Pacific. In response, the Japanese mobilized massive reinforcements, vowing to drive the Americans off the island. For months, the two sides fought a brutal seesaw battle across the island. From jungle ambushes to positional warfare, from naval fleet showdowns to aerial dogfights, every inch of land soaked in blood. For the American soldiers on the island, the greatest enemies were not just the ruthless Japanese troops, but also the harsh environment, scarce supplies, and rampant diseases. Mosquitoes carrying malaria spread the illness, leaving many soldiers bedridden with high fevers. Relentless rain flooded the trenches, keeping the soldiers' socks and boots perpetually soaked, leading to widespread foot rot and skin diseases. And most unbearable of all, the lack of hot meals. Henry Nobel had originally been a cook aboard the U.S. Navy transport ship USS Cape Esperance, responsible for feeding the crew. In mid-August, the transport ship was ordered to deliver supplies to the U.S. landing forces on Guadalcanal. En route, it was attacked by a Japanese submarine, sustaining severe damage and being forced to make an emergency stop at Lunga Point on Guadalcanal. With frontline troops desperately in need of logistical support, Nobel volunteered to join the landing forces and head to the front lines, becoming a field cook. He had initially thought his job would be to set up a kitchen in the rear and prepare meals for the soldiers, but upon arriving on Guadalcanal, he realized the conditions were far worse than he could have imagined. The Japanese blockade had cut off resupply lines, leaving critical shortages of food, fuel, cooking utensils, and even clean drinking water. Before Nobel's arrival, the soldiers on the front lines had subsisted solely on C rations and K rations. A C ration contained 6 cans, 2 with meat, 4 with vegetables or fruit, paired with hardtack biscuits and chocolate. While portable and long-lasting, these rations tasted terrible. The meat cans were mostly greasy stew or sausage, which caused stomach aches after prolonged consumption. The hardtack was rock hard, requiring large amounts of water to swallow. More importantly, the rations were always cold. In the damp, chilly jungle nights, eating cold food not only failed to warm the soldiers, but also worsened their physical condition. Many soldiers developed stomach pain and diarrhea from a steady diet of cold rations, severely undermining their combat readiness. Nobel watched this with growing concern. He knew that for soldiers trapped in such desperate circumstances, a hot meal was about more than just filling their bellies. It was a source of spiritual comfort, a reminder that they were not forgotten by the rear echelons, and a spark to reignite their will to fight. So he began scrounging for usable supplies, determined to find a way to make hot food for the troops. In the jungle behind the lines, he discovered a hidden cave, High elevation, well concealed from the Japanese, and sheltered from the wind and rain, it was the perfect makeshift kitchen. Next, he needed to solve the problems of fuel and cooking utensils. For fuel, he noticed numerous wrecked Japanese vehicles and aircraft scattered across the battlefield. Leading a small team of logistics soldiers, he risked his life to salvage these wrecks, siphoning gasoline and diesel to use for heating food. For cooking utensils, he collected discarded steel helmets from the soldiers, captured Japanese lunchboxes and iron pots, fastening them together with wire to create makeshift cookware. The biggest challenge was ingredients. With supply lines cut, fresh vegetables and meat were virtually non-existent. Noble had to get creative with the limited resources available. He opened up the C-ration meat and vegetable cans, poured their contents into the iron pots to heat them, then added wild fruits and edible plants he foraged from the jungle to make stew. He also found plenty of coconut trees on the island and led the soldiers to harvest coconuts, using the coconut water as a substitute for drinking water and the coconut meat to make simple desserts. To add flavor, he retrieved a small stock of salt, pepper, and ketchup from the damaged transport ship, carefully hoarding them and using only a pinch at a time when cooking. The night of October 14th marked the 27th time Nobel had braved enemy fire to deliver hot food to the front lines. Prior to this, he had successfully provided nearly 100 hot meals, each time significantly boosting the soldiers' morale. One soldier wrote in his diary, "Nobel's hot meals were our greatest hope on Guadalcanal. Every time we ate his food, I felt like I could hold on for one more day, kill one more Jap." At that moment, Nobel clutched the iron bucket, crawling through a hail of bullets and artillery fire. His figure seemed small against the dark night, but the iron bucket in his hands glowed with a warm light, a poignant beacon in the midst of the brutal battle. The Japanese charge continued, and the American defenses remained under intense pressure. But the soldiers who had eaten the hot meal seemed reinvigorated. They picked up their rifles, charged back to the front lines, their shooting more steady, their battle cries louder. Nobel watched this scene, a gratified smile spreading across his face. He knew that while his work didn't directly kill the enemy, it was contributing invisibly to the battle's outcome. He straightened his apron, picked up the half-empty iron bucket, and prepared to return to the makeshift kitchen to cook for the next group of rotating soldiers. The night remained dark, the artillery fire fierce, but the smoke from the field kitchen would not be extinguished, and Henry Nobel's legend would endure. To understand why Henry Nobel's hot meals became a spiritual pillar on Guadalcanal, we must first recognize the brutal backdrop of the battle and the strategic predicament facing U.S. forces in the South Pacific. Rewind to June 1942. The Battle of Midway ended with the Imperial Japanese Navy suffering a devastating defeat. 4 of its aircraft carriers sunk, marking the first time the strategic initiative in the Pacific shifted from Japan to the United States. Yet Japan refused to abandon its expansionist ambitions. In the South Pacific, it continued to advance its Southern Operations Plan, aiming to occupy New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, cut the U.S. maritime supply lines to Australia, isolate the continent, and lay the groundwork for further expansion. Guadalcanal, located at the southeastern tip of the Solomon Islands, stretches approximately 150 kilometers long and 40 kilometers wide. With rugged terrain covered by dense tropical jungle, it has a hot, humid climate and swarms of disease-carrying mosquitoes. For Japan, capturing Guadalcanal and completing its airfield would extend its fighter aircraft's combat radius to northeastern Australia and most of the Solomon Islands waters, directly threatening U.S. lifelines at sea. For the United States, seizing Guadalcanal would not only break Japan's strategic blockade, but also turn the island into a forward base for counterattacking Japanese forces in the Southwest Pacific, paving the way for the gradual implementation of the island-hopping strategy. Thus, this seemingly insignificant tropical island became a strategic linchpin for both sides, destined to be the site of a brutal seesaw battle. In July 1942, approximately 2,000 men from the Imperial Japanese Army's 11th Engineer Regiment landed on Guadalcanal and began constructing an airfield near Lunga Point in the northern part of the island. U.S. intelligence detected this activity, and the military immediately formulated Operation Watchtower, a plan to launch a preemptive landing on Guadalcanal and seize the under-construction airfield. At the time, the U.S. military had not yet established a complete operational system in the South Pacific. The landing force was led by the 1st Marine Division, a well-trained unit but one with little to no experience in large-scale tropical jungle warfare, completely unfamiliar with Guadalcanal's environment. On the Japanese side, the 8th Area Army, responsible for defending the Solomon Islands region, commanded multiple divisions and naval fleets, boasting substantial troop strength and extensive jungle combat experience. The troop deployments of both sides underwent significant phase changes. When U.S. forces first landed on August 7, 1942, they committed approximately 11,000 troops, primarily 3 regiments of the 1st Marine Division, equipped with M1 Garand rifles, Browning automatic rifles, 60mm and 81mm mortars, M3 Stuart light tanks, and other weapons. Meanwhile, the Japanese garrison on Guadalcanal consisted of only about 2,000 engineers and a small number of garrison troops, armed mainly with Arisaka Type 38 rifles, Type 96 light machine guns, Type 92 heavy machine guns, and mortars, lacking heavy weapons and armored units. As a result, the U.S. landing force made swift progress, capturing Lunga Point Airfield in just 2 days, renaming it Henderson Field, and seizing control of parts of southern Guadalcanal. Upon learning of Guadalcanal's fall, the Japanese immediately dispatched reinforcements from Rabaul to launch a counterattack. In late August 1942, approximately 1,000 men from the Japanese 28th Infantry Regiment landed in northeastern Guadalcanal and launched an assault on Henderson Field, only to be soundly defeated by U.S. forces with nearly the entire unit destroyed. In September, the main strength of the Japanese 2nd Division, around 5,000 troops, landed on Guadalcanal and launched another major offensive against U.S. defenses. The two sides engaged in fierce positional warfare around Henderson Field, suffering heavy casualties on both sides. By mid-October, the period when Henry Nobel was braving artillery fire to deliver hot meals, Japanese troop strength on Guadalcanal had increased to approximately 22,000 men, while U.S. forces had been reinforced to around 19,000 men. The numerical gap between the two sides narrowed, but the Japanese, relying on their tenacious fighting spirit and skilled jungle tactics, exerted immense pressure on U.S. forces. The balance of naval power was even more lopsided. The Imperial Japanese Navy deployed a powerful fleet in the South Pacific, including super battleships like the Yamato and Musashi, along with multiple aircraft carriers, cruisers, and destroyers, wielding significant control over sea and air. In contrast, the U.S. naval presence in the South Pacific was relatively small and spread thin across multiple fronts, unable to concentrate its full strength in the waters surrounding Guadalcanal. This created the U.S. military's most critical vulnerability, a blocked supply line. Starting in late August, the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet repeatedly sortied warships to intercept U.S. supply convoys in the waters around Guadalcanal, sparking several fierce naval battles, including the Battle of Savo Island, the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, and the Battle of Cape Esperance. Among these, the Battle of Savo Island, fought on the night of August 8th to 9th, 1942, resulted in a catastrophic defeat for U.S. forces. The Japanese launched a surprise attack with 5 cruisers and 1 destroyer against the U.S. escort fleet, sinking 4 U.S. cruisers and damaging 1 cruiser and 2 destroyers, killing over 1,000 American sailors while sustaining only minor losses themselves. The battle served as a wake-up call for the U.S. military, revealing Japan's overwhelming naval superiority in the waters around Guadalcanal and making future resupply operations extremely perilous. In the aftermath, U.S. supply convoys were forced to deliver supplies to Guadalcanal under the cover of night, often falling victim to Japanese interception and bombing. A significant portion of food, ammunition, medical supplies, and fuel was sunk en route. Post-war statistics show that between August and October 1942, over 30% of the supplies the U.S. military attempted to deliver to Guadalcanal were destroyed by Japanese forces before reaching frontline troops. Against this strategic backdrop, Henry Nobel's arrival on Guadalcanal epitomizes the logistical crisis facing U.S. forces. Born in 1918 on a small farm in Ohio, Nobel grew up helping his mother cook, developing basic culinary skills. In 1940, at the age of 22, he answered the U.S. government's call to arms and enlisted in the Navy. Due to his cooking experience, he was assigned to the logistics department, becoming a mess cook. Over the next 2 years, Nobel served aboard multiple transport ships, responsible for feeding crew members and accumulating valuable experience in field cooking. In August 1942, Nobel was assigned to the USS Cape Esperance, a transport ship belonging to the U.S. Navy's 6th Transport Fleet, tasked with delivering supplies to U.S. forces in the South Pacific. On August 12th, the Cape Esperance departed Brisbane, Australia, loaded with sea rations, ammunition, and medical supplies, bound for Guadalcanal to resupply the newly landed 1st Marine Division. At the time, Nobel had no idea that this routine resupply mission would forever alter the course of his military career. In the early hours of August 15, as the Cape Esperance sailed through the waters northwest of Guadalcanal, it came under sudden attack by the Japanese submarine 16. The submarine fired 4 torpedoes, 2 of which struck the transport ship's starboard side, tearing massive holes in the hull. Seawater rushed into the vessel at a frantic pace. "All hands to emergency stations," the captain ordered immediately, and the crew scrambled for the lifeboats. Nobel was in the galley preparing breakfast when the alarm sounded. His first instinct was to rush to the storage hold, stuffing several crates of salt, pepper, and ketchup into his backpack. Essential cooking supplies that, in his mind, would be invaluable as long as soldiers needed to eat, even if the ship sank. After over 2 hours of desperate damage control, the Cape Esperance remained afloat but had suffered catastrophic damage. Its propulsion and communication systems were completely disabled, rendering it unable to continue its voyage. Fortunately, the nearby U.S. destroyer USS Gray detected their distress signal, rushed to the scene, and towed the crippled transport ship to the temporary harbor at Lunga Point on Guadalcanal. At the time, Lunga Point served as the main assembly area for U.S. landing forces, a chaotic hub of bustling soldiers and stockpiled supplies, with the air thick with the stench of diesel and blood. The supplies aboard the Cape Esperance were unloaded urgently, but the ship was too badly damaged to resume resupply operations. Its crew was temporarily assigned to the frontline logistics unit. When Nobel stepped ashore, he was confronted by a harrowing sight. Scores of soldiers, weakened by hunger and lack of medical care, lying in makeshift tents. Some, having subsisted on cold rations for weeks, were pale and vomiting uncontrollably. Others, bitten by malaria-carrying mosquitoes, writhed in agony with raging fevers. A logistics officer told Nobel that due to the Japanese blockade, there was no telling when the next supply convoy would arrive. Current food stocks on the front lines would last only a week at most, and most of it consisted of cold sea rations. "We need a cook," the logistics officer said, eyeing the cook's badge on Nobel's chest with urgency. "Someone who can make hot food for the men under these conditions?" Nobel didn't hesitate for a second. He agreed immediately. He knew he couldn't pick up a rifle and fight alongside the frontline troops, but if he could provide them with a hot meal, he could give them the strength to hold on. And so, Henry Nobel, once a transport ship cook, officially became a field cook with the 1st Marine Division, 7th Regiment, embarking on his hot meal mission in the hellscape of Guadalcanal. By this time, the U.S. military's supply line crisis had severely eroded troop combat effectiveness. According to post-war U.S. military records, non-combat casualties among Guadalcanal forces surged between September and October 1942. Gastrointestinal illnesses, malaria, and malnutrition accounted for over 65% of all casualties. In the positions around Henderson Field, each company lost an average of 3 to 5 soldiers per day to hunger and disease, rendering them unable to fight. Worse still, prolonged hunger and harsh conditions dealt a crippling blow to troop morale. Many soldiers developed feelings of war weariness, and some even attempted to desert. The Japanese quickly sensed the U.S. military's logistical desperation and intensified their naval blockade of the island while dispatching more troops to launch increasingly ferocious attacks. On October 12, 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet deployed 2 battleships, 4 cruisers, and 10 destroyers to bombard Henderson Field for over 2 hours, firing approximately 1,500 large-caliber shells. The airfield's runway was heavily damaged, and numerous U.S. fighter planes were destroyed on the ground. On October 14th, the same day Nobel delivered hot meals under cover of night, the Japanese launched another battleship bombardment of Henderson Field, while dispatching the main strength of the 2nd Division to launch a full-scale assault on U.S. defenses in a desperate bid to recapture the airfield. Against this grim backdrop, U.S. military logistics operations grew even more challenging. Not only were food and ammunition in short supply, but even basic drinking water had become a scarce commodity. Rivers and streams on Guadalcanal were teeming with parasites and contaminated by Japanese poison, forcing soldiers to survive on rainwater and small amounts of purified water. And Henry Nobel's mission was to prepare hot meals for frontline troops under these extreme conditions, with limited food, fuel, cooking utensils, and clean water. What seemed like a simple task required immense effort and courage in the brutal reality of Guadalcanal. Nobel's makeshift kitchen was located in a hidden cave near Lunga Point, a spot he and a small team of logistics soldiers had discovered. Concealed by dense vines and bushes, the cave was virtually invisible from the outside. Though its interior was small, barely able to accommodate 10 people, its elevated position kept it safe from flooding, making it an ideal cooking site. To set up the kitchen, Nobel and the soldiers worked tirelessly. They used planks salvaged from Japanese wreckage to build a simple stove inside the cave. They fastened discarded U.S. steel helmets to the stove with wire to serve as cooking pots, and they erected a canvas awning at the cave entrance using material stripped from the damaged transport ship, shielding the area from rain and preventing it from disrupting cooking operations. Fuel was the first major obstacle Nobel faced. Gasoline and diesel were classified as strategic materials, reserved primarily for vehicles and aircraft, and the logistics department could not spare sufficient quantities for cooking. Nobel had to improvise. He noticed numerous wrecked Japanese vehicles and aircraft scattered across the battlefield, many of which still contained residual fuel. Each day, he led 2 logistics soldiers on dangerous forays to these wreck sites, using makeshift fuel cans and hoses to siphon gasoline and diesel from the debris. On occasion, they discovered abandoned Japanese fuel drums near enemy positions. To retrieve these, they had to sneak in under the cover of night, risking detection at every turn. The water supply posed an equally daunting challenge. To ensure the soldiers' food safety, Nobel needed to secure a source of clean drinking water. He located a small mountain spring near the cave, its flow meager but its water relatively pure. To purify it, he added bleach powder salvaged from the transport ship in precise proportions, let the water settle, then used it for cooking. When heavy rains turned the spring water murky, he constructed a simple filter using canvas, allowing the turbid water to seep through before purification. Even then, he insisted on personally tasting each batch of purified water to confirm its safety before using it in meals. By this point, Henry Nobel had fully integrated into the frontline unit. In addition to cooking, he assisted medics in evacuating the wounded during intense fighting. Though his cooking skills were not particularly refined, he consistently used limited ingredients to prepare palatable hot meals for the soldiers. In this brutal battlefield environment, his presence was like a ray of warm sunlight, cutting through the despair clouding the soldiers' hearts. But as Japanese attacks intensified and supply lines deteriorated further, Nobel would face even greater challenges, and his hot meal mission would grow increasingly perilous. October 16, 1942. Early morning dawn had barely broken, and the jungle was still shrouded in thick mist when Henry Nobel began working at the makeshift kitchen stove. The previous night, Japanese attacks had continued until 3 o'clock in the morning, leaving frontline soldiers exhausted and in urgent need of a hot meal to replenish their strength. Nobel squatted beside the stove, stirring a pot of stew with a wooden stick. The ingredients were the same as always, sea-ration meat and vegetable cans, but he had added wild taro and mushrooms he'd foraged in the jungle the afternoon before. These were edible plants he'd identified during supply runs, and after verifying their safety multiple times, he'd begun incorporating them into his cooking. "Nobel, we're running low on fuel. This is all we could siphon today." a logistics soldier tasked with fuel retrieval said, carrying an iron bucket filled with gasoline into the cave. The bucket was caked with dirt and grass. Nobel looked up, wiped sweat from his forehead, and nodded. It's enough. Let's make 2 pots of stew this morning, plus a kettle of hot coffee. Prioritize the frontline troops first. His 2 pots were actually 2 large Japanese iron pots, each holding enough food for about 20 soldiers. To feed the entire battalion, he would have to cook batch after batch. Flames danced in the stove, casting a warm glow inside the cave. As Nobel stirred the stew, he monitored the heat carefully. With fuel in short supply, he had to control the flame precisely, ensuring the food was thoroughly cooked while avoiding waste. To enhance the stew's flavor, he retrieved a small can of salt from his backpack, sprinkled in a pinch, then added half a spoonful of ketchup. The ketchup was a prized possession salvaged from the Cape Esperance. He used it sparingly, reserving it for special occasions. By 6 o'clock in the morning, the first pot of stew was ready. Nobel ladled out a spoonful, blew on it to cool it down, and took a bite. Satisfied with the taste and temperature, he divided the stew into aluminum lunchboxes, placed them in a pre-prepared iron bucket, and wrapped it tightly in canvas to retain heat. I'll deliver the first batch. You two keep cooking the second pot. Stay safe, Nobel instructed the other 2 logistics soldiers. He picked up the iron bucket, bent low, and exited the cave. The journey from the makeshift kitchen to the front lines required traversing approximately 500 meters of dense jungle. The terrain was not only overgrown with tangled vines and bushes, but also potentially infested with Japanese infiltration teams. Nobel trudged through the muddy jungle, his boots sinking into the mire with each step. The crunch of fallen leaves and branches underfoot echoed loudly in the quiet pre-dawn air. He remained vigilant at all times, pausing every few dozen meters to listen for any suspicious sounds. The iron bucket in his arms radiated intense heat, seeping through the canvas and warming his arms. But he dared not relax his grip for a moment, fearing a fall might spill the food. As he passed through a bamboo grove, he suddenly heard a faint rustling sound nearby. Nobel froze instantly, set the iron bucket on the ground, and grabbed a thick branch, peering warily in the direction of the noise. After a tense moment, a monkey darted out of the bamboo grove and vanished into the dense jungle. Nobel exhaled in relief, patted his chest, picked up the bucket, and resumed his journey. Close calls like this were a daily occurrence. Japanese infiltration teams roamed the jungle constantly, lying in wait to ambush U.S. logistics personnel. At 6:30 a.m., Nobel finally reached the front lines. Soldiers were in the process of rotating shifts, and those who had just finished fighting slumped beside their foxholes, pale and exhausted. When they spotted Nobel approaching with the iron bucket, their eyes lit up instantly. "Hot food's here! It's Nobel!" a soldier exclaimed excitedly, jumping up from his foxhole and hurrying toward him. The other soldiers gathered around, their tired faces lighting up with anticipation. Nobel set the bucket on the ground, unwrapped the canvas, and lifted the lid. A cloud of steam mixed with the aroma of food billowed out, filling the air. "Line up! Everyone gets a portion! No one misses out!" Nobel called out, then picked up his wooden spoon and began serving the stew. The soldiers formed a line spontaneously, each holding their steel helmet, waiting patiently. A young soldier named John Smith took his helmet brimming with stew, took a big sip of the hot broth without hesitation. The warm liquid slid down his throat, instantly dispelling the cold and exhaustion from his body. "This is amazing, Nobel. Even better than yesterday's," Smith mumbled through a mouthful of food. "I added some wild taro and mushrooms. Extra nutrition," Nobel replied with a smile, then continued serving the next soldier. He noticed a soldier at the end of the line who hadn't joined the queue, sitting alone beside a foxhole with his knees drawn to his chest, his face looking unwell. Nobel walked over and patted him on the shoulder. "Buddy, why aren't you eating? It's hot stew. We'll warm you right up." The soldier looked up, his face gaunt and his voice hoarse. "I can't eat. My stomach hurts too bad." Nobel knelt down and felt the soldier's forehead, finding it hot to the touch. "Another stomach ache?" he asked. The soldier nodded weakly. "Yeah, ate a cold can yesterday, and it's been killing me ever since last night." Nobel thought for a moment, then pulled a small cloth bag from his pocket containing herbal remedies he'd made himself. These are herbs I collected from the island. Steep them in hot water. It'll help with the pain. Try it, he said. He poured a little hot coffee from the bucket, steeped the herbs in it, and handed the cup to the soldier. Drink this first to soothe your stomach, then try to eat a little stew. Even a few bites will help. The soldier took the cup and sipped the herbal coffee, feeling a warm sensation spread through his stomach, and the pain subsided slightly. He looked at Nobel gratefully, then slowly began eating the stew. Watching him, Nobel's face broke into a gratified smile. He knew that in this harsh environment, the soldiers' bodies were fragile, and a small act of care and kindness could go a long way in comforting them. After delivering the first batch of hot food, Nobel didn't linger. He immediately returned to the makeshift kitchen to prepare the second batch. By the time he got back, the second pot of stew was already done. Without resting, he divided it into the iron bucket and set off for the front lines once more. From 6 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock, Nobel shuttled back and forth between the kitchen and the front lines 4 times, ensuring every soldier on the position got a hot meal. When he returned to the kitchen after the final delivery, he was soaked in sweat, his legs feeling like lead. But he didn't complain. He simply drank a mouthful of water, then began preparing lunch. For lunch, the ingredients were still sea rations, but Nobel came up with a new idea. He crushed hardtack biscuits and mixed them into the stew, creating a porridge-like dish that was easier to digest and more filling. To enhance the flavor, he led the logistics soldiers in harvesting coconuts, chopping the meat into small pieces and adding it to the porridge. When he delivered the lunchtime hot food, the soldiers were delighted by the novel porridge. "Nobel, you're a genius. This porridge is way better than hardtack," one soldier exclaimed. In addition to cooking, Nobel worked tirelessly to improve the soldiers' drinking water conditions. He noticed that many soldiers suffered from diarrhea and gastrointestinal illnesses due to drinking contaminated water. Using canvas and charcoal salvaged from the transport ship, he constructed a more sophisticated water filter. He crushed charcoal into small pieces, placed it in the middle of a canvas sheet, then poured turbid water through the filter. The water that passed through the charcoal became significantly clearer and cleaner. He also added a small valve at the filter's outlet to control the water flow rate, improving filtration efficiency. To ensure more soldiers had access to clean water, Nobel taught other soldiers how to make simple filters. He demonstrated the process step by step, explaining key techniques and precautions, and the soldiers learned quickly. Soon, these simple filters appeared throughout the positions, increasing the soldiers' access to clean drinking water and gradually reducing the incidence of gastrointestinal diseases. When the logistics officer learned of this, he praised Nobel effusively. "Nobel, what you've done is more effective than half the medicine we've got." In late October, the weather on Guadalcanal grew even more severe. Days of continuous heavy rain turned jungle paths into quagmires, making the transport of hot food increasingly difficult. The downpour caused the mountain spring to become murky, requiring more time to filter and purify the water. Vines and bushes, soaked by rain, became slippery, increasing the risk of falls. Most critically, the heavy rain caused the cave serving as the makeshift kitchen to leak, soaking the stove and cooking utensils. To address the leak, Nobel led the logistics soldiers in gathering branches and leaves from the jungle, laying them on the cave's roof and walls, then sealing the gaps with mud. They also dug a simple drainage ditch at the cave entrance to channel rainwater away, preventing it from seeping inside. After a full day of work, the leak was finally fixed. However, the rain had dampened the fuel, making it extremely difficult to ignite. Nobel experimented with various methods and eventually found that placing dry leaves and twigs under the fuel, lighting the leaves first, then gradually adding fuel, would successfully start a fire. The heavy rain also made the journey to deliver hot food more dangerous. On one trip, Nobel slipped and fell into a mud pit while carrying the iron bucket, dropping it on the ground. Ignoring the pain in his body, he scrambled to his feet, picked up the bucket, and checked the food inside. Fortunately, the canvas wrapping had been tight enough that little food spilled out. Only the temperature had dropped slightly. Nobel wiped the mud off his uniform, hugged the bucket tightly, and continued forward. By the time he reached the position, his clothes were completely soaked, and he was shivering violently. But his first concern was whether the soldiers would get to eat hot food. When the soldiers saw Nobel soaked to the bone, they were deeply moved. One soldier took off his own dry uniform and handed it to him. "Nobel, put this on. Don't catch a cold." Nobel smiled and shook his head. "I'm fine. You guys eat quickly. The food's still warm." As the soldiers looked at his sincere smile, they couldn't hold back their emotions. They picked up their helmets and began eating the hot meal greedily. They knew that every bite of this food was a labor of love and perseverance. As time went on, Nobel's hot meals not only improved the soldiers' physical condition, but also boosted their morale dramatically. Previously, demoralized by cold rations and harsh conditions, many soldiers had lost hope of victory. But after eating Nobel's hot food, their spirits lifted noticeably. They smiled more often, and their enthusiasm for training and combat increased. In one battle, U.S. soldiers on the verge of collapse regained their fighting spirit after eating the hot meals Nobel delivered, successfully repelling a Japanese attack. In a post-battle report, one commander wrote, "Henry Nobel's hot meals were our most valuable supply on Guadalcanal. They didn't just fill the soldiers' bellies, they reignited the flame of hope in their hearts. Time and again, it was the hot food that kept the soldiers' morale high, allowing them to tenaciously hold the line against Japanese assaults. The soldiers affectionately nicknamed him the morale cook, saying that the sight of his figure and the aroma of his hot meals were proof they were not fighting alone." Beyond cooking and delivering hot food, Nobel used his free time to help soldiers repair their uniforms and equipment. He collected cloth and needles and thread from the damaged transport ship, setting up a simple repair station in the makeshift kitchen. When soldiers' clothes tore, he sewed them back together. When their shoes wore out, he patched them with branches and cloth strips. He even fixed broken rifle slings using wire and fabric. His hands, skilled at cooking, could also mend just about anything, earning him the reputation of the handyman cook among the troops. Early November, U.S. supply lines finally began to improve. The Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet had suffered heavy losses in previous naval battles. Its strength depleted to the point where it could no longer effectively block U.S. supply convoys. U.S. ships arrived at Guadalcanal unimpeded, delivering massive quantities of food, ammunition, medical supplies, and fuel. When a logistics officer delivered a shipment of fresh vegetables and meat to the makeshift kitchen, Nobel was too overcome with emotion to speak. He carefully stored the fresh ingredients, then set about preparing a hearty meal for the soldiers. That night, the familiar aroma of fresh food wafted from the makeshift kitchen for the first time in months. Using fresh pork and vegetables, Nobel made braised pork, stir-fried greens, and a large pot of steamed rice. When he delivered these meals to the front lines, the soldiers were stunned. They hadn't tasted fresh food in what felt like an eternity. "Good God, fresh pork! And greens!" one soldier exclaimed, tears welling in his eyes. The soldiers gathered around, eating heartily, their faces glowing with happiness. Nobel stood watching them, a content smile spreading across his face. He knew his efforts had been worth it. He had finally been able to give the soldiers a truly satisfying hot meal. Even after supplies improved, Nobel never relaxed his standards. He continued waking up early each morning to prepare hot food, personally delivering it to the front lines. Using fresh ingredients, he experimented with new dishes to vary the soldiers' diet. His braised pork, stir-fried vegetables, and tomato scrambled eggs quickly became favorites among the troops. The soldiers joked that Nobel was a better cook than any restaurant chef back home. During the Guadalcanal campaign, Henry Nobel provided over 300 hot meals, serving more than 5,000 soldiers. Through his ingenuity and perseverance, he brought warmth and hope to the troops under extreme conditions. His deeds soon spread throughout the U.S. military, becoming a legend among the soldiers. Many later recalled that their most vivid memory of Guadalcanal was the taste of Nobel's hot meals, a rare source of comfort in the jungle hell. Nobel's work was far from without peril. During one food delivery run, he was ambushed by Japanese forces. He and two logistics soldiers were carrying the iron bucket through the jungle when gunfire suddenly erupted, striking one soldier dead instantly. Nobel reacted quickly, pulling the other soldier behind a large tree for cover. He set the bucket down and grabbed a nearby rifle, salvaged from a fallen comrade. Though not a combat soldier, he had learned basic shooting skills to defend himself. The Japanese ambush party numbered 5 men, hiding in the jungle and firing continuously at Nobel and his companion. Taking cover behind the tree, the two Americans returned fire tenaciously. Nobel's shooting was not particularly skilled, but he remained calm and composed, taking careful aim and firing whenever an opportunity presented itself. After more than 10 minutes of intense fighting, U.S. reinforcements arrived and drove off the Japanese raiders. Nobel immediately rushed to check on the wounded soldier, discovering he had sustained a severe abdominal gunshot wound, bleeding profusely. Nobel grabbed his first aid kit and applied a makeshift bandage, then helped carry the soldier to the rear medical station with the reinforcements. The ambush drove home the dangers of being a field cook, but it only strengthened Nobel's resolve. "As long as the soldiers need hot food, I'll keep delivering it, even if it costs me my life," he said. After that incident, he took extra precautions on his supply runs, carrying a rifle and extra ammunition to defend himself in case of future attacks. Henry Nobel's heroic deeds not only moved the soldiers around him, but also caught the attention of senior officers. Major General Alexander Vandegrift, commander of the 1st Marine Division, personally summoned Nobel to commend him. "Nobel, you are an outstanding soldier. Your work has made an invaluable contribution to our victory in this campaign. Your hot meals are more powerful than any artillery shell," Vandegrift said. To honor his service, the general awarded him the Bronze Star Medal, a prestigious decoration recognizing his extraordinary heroism and dedication. Henry Nobel's hot meal mission was never an isolated endeavor. It was deeply intertwined with the key battle junctures of the Guadalcanal campaign. His food deliveries acted as an invisible lifeline, providing the soldiers with the will to hold on during the U.S. military's darkest hours. The Battle of Edson's Ridge, fought from September 12th to 14th, 1942, known to U.S. forces as the Battle of the Bloody Ridge, stands as a prime example of how Nobel's hot meals turned the tide of battle. This brutal jungle assault was one of the fiercest engagements of the Guadalcanal campaign, and Nobel's hot food proved to be a critical lifeline for the beleaguered U.S. defenders. During the battle, approximately 3,000 troops from the Imperial Japanese Army's 2nd Division, 29th Infantry Regiment, launched a night assault on the U.S. positions at Edson's Ridge. Using sophisticated jungle infiltration tactics, Japanese soldiers slipped through dense vegetation to launch multi-pronged attacks on the American lines. The two sides engaged in brutal close-quarters combat, bayonet charges, and hand grenade exchanges across the narrow ridge. U.S. soldiers from the 1st Marine Raider Battalion and the 5th Regiment, 2nd Battalion, clung tenaciously to their hastily dug foxholes and trenches. The fighting raged for 2 full days and nights, with the position changing hands multiple times and both sides suffering catastrophic casualties. During the fiercest fighting on the night of the 13th, supply lines to the U.S. positions were completely cut off. The soldiers were not only running out of ammunition, but also had almost exhausted their sea rations. Many had eaten nothing but a few bites of cold canned food during the continuous fighting, their strength drained to the breaking point. It was at this moment that Nobel, accompanied by 2 logistics soldiers, braved Japanese artillery fire and intense small arms fire to deliver 2 iron buckets of hot stew and coffee to the front lines at Edson's Ridge. The narrow ridge terrain made it a death trap, with Japanese firepower sealing off every approach. Nobel was forced to crawl on his stomach, inching his way toward the U.S. trenches, the iron bucket in his arms pierced by shrapnel, hot soup seeping out and scalding his arm, but he refused to let go. When the hot food reached the soldiers, many were too exhausted to lift their rifles, but the aroma of the stew revived them. They struggled to sit up and took the helmets brimming with food. A soldier who fought in the Battle of Edson's Ridge later recalled, "It was the most delicious meal of my life. The hot stew slid down my throat, and my numb body suddenly felt strong again. Even my hands stopped shaking when I held my rifle. Without Nobel's hot meals, we never would have survived that night." Post-war statistics confirm that soldiers who ate the hot food showed a marked improvement in combat effectiveness during the subsequent counterattack, ultimately holding the position and inflicting over 2,000 casualties on the Japanese 29th Infantry Regiment, virtually annihilating the unit. Beyond land battles, Nobel's hot food deliveries were also closely linked to the outcome of naval engagements. The Battle of Tassafaranga, fought on November 30th, 1942, was a critical naval battle in the U.S. military's final push to break Japan's supply blockade of Guadalcanal. Prior to this battle, the Japanese had implemented the Tokyo Express operation, using destroyers to deliver supplies and reinforcements to Guadalcanal under cover of night, with U.S. forces repeatedly deploying fleets to intercept them. When the Battle of Tassafaranga broke out, U.S. soldiers on Guadalcanal were facing another acute supply shortage. Fuel and food scarcity made Nobel's hot meal operations increasingly difficult. He was forced to reduce delivery frequency, prioritizing the frontline troops. During the naval battle, U.S. fleets held a numerical advantage but suffered a devastating defeat due to tactical errors, with 4 cruisers sunk and 2 damaged by Japanese destroyer torpedo attacks. News of the defeat dealt a heavy blow to troop morale on Guadalcanal, with many soldiers fearing supply lines would be cut off entirely. To boost morale, Nobel used his last remaining can of ketchup to make a batch of enhanced hot stew, personally delivering it to every foxhole. "We can't help with the fighting at sea," he told the soldiers, "but what we can do is eat our fill of hot food and hold this position. As long as we stand our ground, victory will be ours." The soldiers looked into Nobel's determined eyes, ate the steaming stew, and their morale rallied. They threw themselves back into the fight with renewed resolve. Notably, Nobel's hot food supply efforts also reflect the logistical and tactical differences between U.S. and Japanese forces during the Guadalcanal campaign. While U.S. sea rations had a poor taste, their standardized canned packaging made them easy to store and transport, providing Nobel with a stable base of ingredients for his hot meals. In contrast, Japanese rations, consisting mainly of rice and dried vegetables, were highly susceptible to mold and spoilage in the tropical jungle's humid environment, a major factor contributing to the high rate of non-combat casualties among Japanese troops later in the campaign. Tactically, while U.S. forces initially lacked jungle combat experience, their strong emphasis on logistical support, even amid supply shortages, allowed them to gradually adapt to the battlefield environment. The Japanese, however, relied excessively on spiritual strength, neglecting the critical importance of logistical supply, ultimately leading to the collapse of their offensive on Guadalcanal. In terms of weaponry, the M1 Garand rifle Nobel carried during his food runs also exemplified the superior firepower of U.S. forces. This semi-automatic rifle's high rate of fire and reliability gave it a decisive edge over the Japanese Arisaka Type 38 bolt-action rifle in close-quarters combat. During one Japanese infiltration team's attack on the makeshift kitchen, Nobel used his M1 Garand to team up with 2 logistics soldiers and successfully repel the raiders. Meanwhile, the Japanese Type 96 light machine gun, plagued by design flaws, frequently jammed in the jungle's damp conditions, its sustained fire capability far inferior to the U.S. Browning automatic rifle, providing a measure of security for Nobel's food delivery missions. December 1942. As U.S. forces gradually gained control of sea and air around Guadalcanal, massive quantities of supplies began arriving on the island unimpeded. Japanese offensive operations were completely halted, and the tide of the Guadalcanal campaign turned decisively in America's favor. By this time, Nobel no longer had to risk his life siphoning fuel or searching for water sources. The makeshift kitchen was equipped with standard cooking utensils and abundant ingredients. Yet he maintained his rigorous work routine, waking up early each morning to prepare hot food and personally delivering it to the front lines. "The soldiers are fighting and dying out there," he said. "The least I can do is make sure they get a hot meal every day. It's my duty as a cook." On February 9, 1943, Japanese forces officially withdrew from Guadalcanal, marking the end of the campaign with a decisive U.S. victory. The brutal 6-month battle cost the United States approximately 7,100 casualties, while Japanese losses exceeded 25,000 men. Though Henry Nobel's hot food supply work did not achieve the spectacular battlefield feats of frontline soldiers, it provided the critical logistical backbone for the U.S. victory through its simple, steadfast service. His story became a model of logistical support during the Guadalcanal campaign, enshrined in the official history of the 1st Marine Division. Henry Nobel's hot meal legend on Guadalcanal is far more than a tale of individual heroism. It profoundly illustrates the core military principle that logistics is combat power. Traditional perceptions of warfare prioritize frontline firepower, rifles and artillery, as the decisive factors in victory. Yet the Guadalcanal campaign demonstrated that during prolonged attritional warfare, the quality of logistical support directly determines a unit's sustained combat capability. Nobel's hot meals served as the vital link transforming this logistical power into morale and fighting strength. His ingenuity and perseverance addressed not only the soldiers' physical hunger, but also injected a sense of belonging and care into their desperate situation. In the face of ammunition shortages and imminent defeat, this spiritual support proved even more valuable than resupplies of bullets and shells. Tactically, Nobel's hot food deliveries directly reduced the U.S. military's non-combat casualty rate. Prior to the implementation of his hot meal program, gastrointestinal illnesses and malnutrition accounted for over 65% of all U.S. casualties on Guadalcanal. With the regular supply of hot food and the widespread adoption of his water purification systems, this figure dropped to below 30% by November, effectively preserving frontline combat strength. More importantly, the morale boost provided by hot meals enabled U.S. forces to rally repeatedly during critical defensive engagements, from holding the line at the Battle of Edson's Ridge to stabilizing troop spirits after the defeat at Tassafaronga. This seamless integration of food security and tactical stability provided a replicable logistical template for future U.S. jungle and island warfare operations. Strategically, Nobel's actions catalyzed a comprehensive overhaul of the U.S. military's field logistics system in the post-war era. The Guadalcanal campaign was a wake-up call for the U.S. military, exposing the flaws of its traditional combat-first, logistics-second mindset. In response, field hot meal support was formally incorporated into military logistical standards. The U.S. military developed specialized portable field kitchens and insulated food transport equipment, and even established dedicated field cooking units, clearly defining their support responsibilities and safety protocols in combat zones. In essence, Nobel's steadfast dedication laid the groundwork for the modern U.S. military logistics system. In subsequent conflicts, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and beyond, the U.S. military's sophisticated field food and water purification systems evolved directly from the human-centric logistical philosophy Nobel pioneered on Guadalcanal. The true value of history lies in its ability to inform the present. Henry Nobel's story remains compelling decades later because it embodies the profound power of ordinary people performing their duties with extraordinary dedication. He was not a decorated general or an ace fighter pilot. He was simply a field cook. Yet through his unassuming work, he brought a glimmer of humanity to the brutality of war. In the jungle hell of Guadalcanal, the spatula and iron bucket in his hands became more comforting weapons than any rifle or artillery piece. His figure, crawling through a hail of bullets and shrapnel, stands as a testament to the idea that fulfilling one's duty is itself an act of heroism. For us today, this story serves as a powerful reminder. Every great victory is built on the quiet contributions of countless ordinary individuals. This principle applies not only to warfare, but to all aspects of life. The people who uphold their responsibilities with unwavering commitment in seemingly mundane roles are the ones who truly safeguard our peaceful and prosperous life. Well, that wraps up today's story from Guadalcanal. After hearing about Henry Nobel's incredible journey, I'm sure you're as touched as I am by the dedication of this morale cook. In war narratives dominated by aircraft carriers and fighter jets, it's easy to overlook these seemingly minor logistical details, but it is precisely these details that often determine the outcome of battles and the human face of history. If you enjoyed this forgotten tale of wartime heroism, don't forget to like, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another fascinating history story. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. What do you believe is the most indispensable logistical support in warfare? Hot meals, clean water, medicine, or ammunition? Also, if there are other untold stories of ordinary people during World War II that you'd like to hear about, drop a comment. I'll do my best to research and share them with you.